Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you James Elferlane Anderson.
Forgive me. I'll use this. Good morning. Morning. That was the worst thing I've ever done in my life, was to name Jim the Gym Father. All of my emails are signed the Gym Father now. So I created a monster. Guys, it's awesome to be with you. And it's good to be with the founding chapter. And it's always humbling, I think, for me coming in 21 years in. I think to recognize the history and the legacy and the number of guys who have passed through doors here or in any one of our 64 chapters. It's always very humbling. My journey to you guys today started last night in New Haven with dinner with about 6 of our chapters up there. And I didn't quite know exactly what to expect. We were going to have dinner. We were going to have pizza that we don't really have in Colorado, which is where I live now. It'll bring Jesus into your heart, by the way. It was good stuff. But we had dinner last night, and we started talking about how guys got there and what was their journey to dinner last night. And it was really, it was a humbling moment to hear guys talk a little bit about the guys who have kind of held them up by their armpits during some pretty dark times. Some of their stories, the calamity in their life had been brought by a total stranger or an incident completely out of their control. Some of them, like many of us, brought this calamity on themselves. It doesn't make it any less painful. So today I was asked to share with you a little bit of my story. I kind of wish my story wasn't my story. I wish I didn't have to say this is how I got here. I'd love to actually just be a guy who had a great story because he listened instead of a guy who had to bang his way through a lot of really sharp and stupid choices in life. For the last couple of years, we've had Paul Young come and share with us at the National Retreat in D.C. And one of the elements of Paul's message that I like the most is he talks a lot about our stories, and our stories are sacred. I personally, I have a degree in screenwriting, film directing, and marketing from Biola, and also from the University of Southern California. The only reason that matters, and for any reason, is because I think story is really important. I think story is our sacred. It is our, it's our card that we send with other people. So I have been married for 19 years to a gal I met at Biola. That's part of the admission process, is you get your money back if you can't get married by your senior year. So it worked well. So I married a gal that I met at Biola. We've been married for 19 years. The last 5 of which have, I think, been very painful and have been filled with a lot of broken parts and a lot of broken pieces, and some elements that I brought into our marriage that have made the last 5 the ones that my wife really earned. In that 19 years, we've managed to produce 2 little girls that are 9 and 7. And I was explaining to the guys last night that part of what I think this season of my life is about teaching them about the Jesus I met later in life, and not necessarily the one that I started life with. So in that, I grew up with a Jesus that maybe many of us knew, one from Sunday school, one from the flannel graph, if you remember that. I had a very small, very thin Jesus. He was easy to move around. He was easy to manipulate. I could put him into the story kind of wherever I wanted to stick him. And in a lot of ways, Jesus really only had some of the power of my dad, but he looked a lot like me. And in that when my brother and I were growing up, we knew that there were certain things we weren't supposed to do, or there were certain values that were promoted in our house. And one of the secret unspoken values in our home was self-sufficiency. And in that, self-sufficiency is don't be a burden on anyone else. Take care of yourself, clean up your own freaking messes, and try not to weigh the family down. It sounds wonderful. It's a cancer in every relationship I've ever been in, and it's no more certainly than the one with my wife, because it restricts the ability to ask for help and to be vulnerable and to be available. But in my house, if my brother and I were screwing around and we spilled paint in the garage, it went a little like this. We would clean it all up. We'd make sure the rags were put where they were supposed to be, and the rags were ones that would be okay to clean up paint. And we would do all this sort of stuff. And then we would go to my dad, and we would say, hey, we're really sorry. We know we weren't supposed to be doing that, and you've told us lots of times, and we know, but now we really know. And we cleaned up, we did all the things we think you want to do, but we did not touch the paint thinner. So that's a chemical, and that's for you, you're the dad. So will you come in and erase our mess from the garage floor? That's the Jesus that I also knew. So we're going to let you, Jesus, come in with the paint and the blood, and you're going to, the paint thinner, of Jesus is going to come in and erase this mess we've made on the garage floor permanently. And we know we shouldn't have done it, and we know this, but that's a small Jesus. And the thing about me is that I think that the Jesus I knew looked a lot like me. In fact, I was kind of sure that maybe I could do most of the things that Jesus was supposed to do. I could clean up most of the mess. I could fix a lot of these things. And in that, I reduced Jesus to a few very small, inconsequential choices, and basically blasphemed the power and strength of the Son of God. So when I made a mess of my life, suddenly I needed a much bigger Jesus than the one that I knew and had met. I think as we transition into this point of the story, I think Tim Keller, who is on our board and was one of my early investors, as you saw in the conglomerate to sell Jim's house, Tim Keller has a very potent message that I think is very NCS specific. And he basically says that the beginning of friendship starts with two words, and they are you too. And this starts with simple things that, tell me where you're from, and you could have grown up in a small town, or, even thinking about the beginnings of NCS with Jim Lane and B.J. Weber started because they both liked the Cubs. This year, that looks very smart. Back then, it was a completely stupid thing to be promoting, that you were a Cubs fan. But the beginning starts with this sense of like, oh, you too. These things drive you. You grew up in a small town. You had a dad that was an alcoholic. You lost a brother. You lost a son. You've been through this. Something like this has happened to you. So it ranges from the very benign of sports teams and where we grew up, and it goes all the way to the extreme of the elements that we carry every day inside of us. And I think that I think Tim met his wife, Kathy, looking at French literature, and he was like, who's this? A good-looking girl in here. What is she doing? And it began with that idea of you too. And I think that when we tell our stories, we give each other the opportunity to not be alone and to stop placing ourselves in isolation because we don't understand God's gift of companionship. And to me, that is what NCS is about. So I had a good career, at least some good opportunities. I wouldn't even call it a career. I had some great opportunities in the film business. But I had a gigantic hole in me. I had a hole in me that said I got something to prove. I have a performance economy. I'm a approval junkie, and I'm going to prove that I was right, that I belong to be here. Hollywood's an amazing place to have that inadequacy, by the way. They'll fill that very quickly for you. And then I did move into real estate, and I began to do real estate at a very, very, very high level. And very quickly, I had clients that were like on the front pages of magazines. So Jay-Z and Kevin Durant, Rihanna. I had Raquel Welch for some of you older dudes. She still looks great. And she told me I could call her Rocky. I thought you'd appreciate that. But I was making money very fast, and I was making money very easily. And I began to wonder, am I smarter than everyone else? And that would be great because I've always felt less than everyone else. I began winning national awards. I began speaking at the National Association of Realtors, where basically I would just hand out 1,500 business cards. We'd answer the phone for the next year, and we'd do $50 or $60 million in sales. It was just starting to work really well. The issue that was happening is I have this huge hole in my heart. I'm married at this point for 10 years, and my wife is like, "You are a walking dead man. You do not resemble the man I married, the man I knew." And my mother always told me, "You will become like the people that you hang out with." It's true in the schoolyard. It's true at Jim Lane. I'm becoming cranky and short. But at that period of my life, I was selling $5 and $6 million homes in cash to women who were upset that their husband hadn't made partner and that they couldn't have the house they really wanted. There's such an ironic dissatisfaction in handing the keys to a very beautiful young woman with a beautiful family who looks like they have it all together. And I'm like, hey, congratulations. Like, this is the house you and Brian deserve. It's amazing. And she'd say, "Oh, thanks, James. Well, maybe Brian will make partner in 2 years, and then you can come and sell this, and we'll get the house we really want." And I just began to realize there is an endless hole in that bucket, and I was watching them pour millions and millions and millions of dollars into it, and they were coming out empty. They were coming out unhappy. I don't think that's specifically distinctive to Los Angeles. I think it happens to all of us, and it can happen in big ways and small ways. But I was becoming just like those people. I was a materialistic, egocentric, selfish ass. And my wife was right when she said, "You are a walking dead man, and I don't know even who you are." So I have a lot of tension at home, and then I have wild popularity at work. I had the audacity, this is one of my least, I'm going to tell you this, it's actually one of the most embarrassing things I've ever said. I actually told my wife, she was yelling at me about something, and I said, "Do you want to know something? When I'm outside this house, I'm like a beetle. People line up to talk to me. And when I'm here, I'm just some stupid fool who forgot to take things out or is late for ballet." Holy crap. Like, what kind of statement is that? Talk about arrogance, talk about these things. But this is the life I actually really believed. I really believed, like, you don't understand how important I am out there. Well, part of that tension came that when I was in these places, I was smart. I was attractive. People wanted to be with me. And that filled a very specific broken part of me. And then very soon there just were no shortage of attractive young women who wanted to be in my company, and that felt good. There was no shortage of opportunities for me to violate the promises that I had made to my father-in-law. There were no shortage of opportunities for me to behave in a way that had no bearing on the upbringing I'd had in faith. This all came pretty tragically to a head when I came home and found a note taped to my banister that said, "I know, and I'm gone." And she was. So on the day that my wife was meeting with an attorney to end our marriage, I was on the cover of Beverly Hills magazine as the guy you need to know to get the house you want. So my personal life and my professional life were passing each other in a death spiral and in a rocket ship. And one of the things I had to come to terms with is something my wife said to me later, and she basically made the distinction that she's like, "I think everyone likes you, James. I just think you're really hard to love. And for those of us that have to love you through all of this shit, it's a bigger bill than I think you would like to know." I would call that moment the great accounting of my life, where I had to decide, did I have enough to cover all of this? And the answer was no. I came up wanting. So I was weighed, I was measured, and the great accounting of my life told me I was short, and I didn't have enough to cover it. This is all sort of promptly happening around Thanksgiving, which is an awesome time, as many of you know, to have a complete crisis. It's in the middle of everyone else's Thanksgiving and joyous season. So I was disinvited to Thanksgiving for good reasons, and I'm probably nearly suicidal. I mean, I'm a mess. And I have a bunch of people saying, "Oh, don't be alone, James, come and eat at our house." I'm like, "Oh yeah, why don't I come take a big shit in the middle of your table, because I'm a freaking wreck, okay? So no one wants me at your table." And part of my journey was I really felt like I need to get out, I need to get away, I need to get quiet. And so I packed up my car and I drove to Yosemite by myself and with a tent. And I took out all the stuff that was great distractions, good books, whiskey, wine, all that good stuff that was a great distraction. I just went with a Bible, a notepad, and my iPad so that if I wanted to do some research, I could. It snowed 2.5 feet that week. So it's me in a tent in Yosemite at Thanksgiving. And I was a wreck, and I just said, "God, if you want this life, I need you to show up, and I need you to show up big." God's good at those kind of dares, is what I have found. And that weekend, I came across a couple of things. I began what is affectionately known in many of the 12-step circles as an inventory. And I began to say, I don't even know how to ask forgiveness about things that I've never been able to actually talk about, because if I say they're true, then I have to reconcile that. And so I began on a legal pad writing these, the things that I felt that I had sorrow for, the things that I had made mistakes, the situations I had put myself in, things I had pursued. And to my great distress, it was actually a fairly long list. Multiple pages. And I remember sitting in my little tent in the snow, and I remember saying, "God, what do I do with this? Like, what do I do now that I've been honest? And I feel like I've kind of vomited in my tent here. Like, what do I do? Because I can't clean it up." That night I was led to 2 Corinthians 12:9. And I loved the verse that says, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness." That's a great idea. So the next morning I went down to the climbing store. I bought a red Sharpie. And I just began to pray over these things. And I would write, "My grace is sufficient for you, James. My grace is sufficient for you, James." Across all these pages. I love the first part of that verse. The second part of the verse is a lot harder to swallow, which says, "Therefore I'll boast all the more about my failures and shortcomings, so that Christ's power can rest on me. I don't like that part of the verse. I like the grace is sufficient for you. Not that I have to tell everyone what an ass I've been. But that is the story of redemption, is not that I've been forgiven, it's that I've been redeemed. It's not that I was once lost and now have found a way home, but that Christ has made me a son. It's a much harder part of that verse to swallow. The second verse that I kept coming to, or portion of the Bible, I was just reading voraciously, and if I saw there was a little note and it cross-referenced something, I would jump to there. When I didn't understand what that was, I would take my iPad down to the one place in Yosemite that has Wi-Fi, and I would just do research, like sitting in this room. And it's Thanksgiving, so there's families everywhere, kids are playing, and I had this family come up and they're like, "Hi, I'm so sorry, do you speak English?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." And they were like, "We've just been watching you, and we're kind of wondering, what are you doing here?" I said, I got what I wanted. I wanted to act like I didn't know anybody, anything, like I didn't have a family, and like no one had a claim on me. And today I got what I wanted. I got my wish, which is I don't have to be tied down to anybody, and now I'm alone. Happy Thanksgiving. In one of the things that I saw, I kept moving to Genesis and Exodus. And in Exodus 33, there's several things about what's happening with Moses. One is the veil, where he's deciding, I want people only to see the glory of God and not the glory of man. And one of the key statements that I kept coming back to my wife's statement about liking me and loving me and how difficult those two things are to live in the same place. I was brought to an understanding that I think when I leave a lot of situations, people had always said, "Oh my gosh, that guy's a ton of fun. That guy's great. We should hang out with him again." And that's one way that it can work. The other is I'd like to leave situations and have people say, "Wow, that guy serves a great God." And I'd like to find that God. And one is the glory of man, and the other is the glory of the reflection of our Father. Right in that same section of Exodus 33, 32, and 33, Moses goes to the tent of meeting, which has special meaning to me because I'm living in a tent in the snow. And God just kept saying, "Come here, be here, and let's meet, and let's talk, and let's figure things out." I don't know a lot of Greek words. I know one, and it's meant the world to me. And it's the Greek word for the tent of meeting. I found it on my iPad in that Wi-Fi spot. And that word is used again in 2 Corinthians 12:9. And it's the same word for Christ's power rest on me. I don't think those two things are an accident in my particular situation. That's the extent of my Greek knowledge. But it really has meant the world to me to understand that my failures and my shortcomings are the beginning of the reflection of God's glory, the redemption, and Him covering my mess. And that comes from having a bigger, bolder Jesus. I spent $42,000 on counseling that year, very good investment. And I began to give what I called the four voices in my life. I decided who were the men I could trust, because a lot of people were mad. And I had to decide who are the men I will trust to speak into this moment in my life. And in that process, I began to put my life back together, and one of the key elements of that was I fired myself. So I walked into my office on the corner of PCH and Sunset overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and I'm sitting there in a daze, and I realized the first day I'm here and my wife and kids are somewhere else, I'm in the wrong place. So I called my staff together and I said, "Hope you guys had a nice Thanksgiving. I'm leaving. and I'm never, ever coming back. And I did. So I walked out with a rug and a lamp that I think are magnificent and irreplaceable. So I took those with me and I left. I took the next year and just got quiet, did a lot of counseling with my wife. And one of the things I kept saying is I'm like a little tornado, and I have a hole inside of me right at the center, and around it is just swirling destruction. And it's got a ton of power. It's creating a lot of its own energy, but it's wiping out houses and homes and churches and friends. And I need to know why that is happening. And part of my journey that year was to unplug the power of that little tornado inside of me, or at least begin that process. The other thing was figuring out how to be married, how to support my wife and love my wife, how to dig out from some of the shame and a lot of those elements. But it also began this idea of like, what am I going to do for work now? I had a great job when I fired myself. Now I don't have any money. So we went from making, $1.5 million a year to paying the bills one day. And she said, all right, we have $72. And I freaked out. I'm like, well, I know how to make money. Let's go back to LA. And every time one of us had this panic moment, it was just this idea of the Israelites saying, take us back to Egypt. We had choice meats there. Everything was fine. And I'm like, we were slaves. We were slaves to materialism. We were slaves to ourselves. It can't possibly be the right decision. But God just kept showing up in ways that were unmistakable and providing for us. But it was the first time I ever asked God, like, what do you want from me? Like, what do you want to do with my life? Because in the past, I had just sort of alerted God as to what I was doing. Dear God, this is what I'm doing. You should probably bless it. It would be a good PR move for you because I'm going to make some waves, and it would be awesome if you could claim some of it and bring people to yourself. My arrogance knew no bounds. That journey led me to go to work for Focus on the Family, which is arguably the last place on earth that most people who know me would ever say I would do well. The amazing thing is the people I was put in front of when I was talking to Jim Daly, and he said, James, I want to know if you can use your story. Like, are you prepared to let it be used? Because I think when you sit down with people and you tell them your story, it may not be pretty, but I think they're going to say either that's me or I need you to meet my son. And I want to know, are you prepared to let that story be used and use it in the way here that God wants it? My answer was yes, and I had the opportunity to meet a ton of people on behalf of Focus on the Family. Here was God's gift to me in this. For the first time, I had to work for someone else, which means I had to do what they wanted, which was a great training for coming to know Jim. The second part was the people I was with in helping them advance the ministry were the same people I'd sold houses to, essentially. Same demographic. Lived in the same houses, drove the same cars, vacationed the same places, had been very rigorous about their compensation package when they started their jobs. The only difference is they were trying to give it all away. So here I am, a recovering materialist egomaniac, and I get to spend the bulk of my time with people who are teaching me about generosity and about how God wants us to hold things. Truly one of the great gifts in my life. One of the things I was asked to do was to go find out what is this new Canaan society. So very specifically, the order came down. We want you to go, take a pocket square, you'll fit right in. And I was told, go. They're everywhere. What is New Canaan Society? They're everywhere. And we want to know, what do they really believe? What do they really do? What is the ethos of this group? We want a full report when you come back. So I went to San Francisco. I was at their retreat. Had the opportunity to meet Jim, which did not go so well. He swore at me and told me how much he hated fundraisers. It was his birthday, actually. It was an auspicious beginning. I think he loves that story too, actually, that he swore at me and I came back. But I went back and I said, this is an amazing thing. I had to question whether it would have ever saved me, because I think I was offered friendship and I didn't know how to accept it. I think I had men in my life that offered me honesty and vulnerability and friendship, and I was unable to accept that from them. But I found in the New Canaan Society a deep passion for wanting to be a part of that. And so I began to just come around. I started coming to all the retreats. And in one of those, I met B.J. Weber. And B.J. was very instrumental in saying to me, James, I think essentially you have no idea what God thinks about you. I think you have a very misguided idea about what God thinks about you. And I want to help you get that back on track. And in doing that, that is part of what led me to end up talking to Jim, and then just not quite 2 years ago to come on as their president. And I have the privilege of meeting men in our 64 chapters across 22 states. And I'll say this. I think we have to tell our stories. And we have to give each other the opportunity to say, you too. We have to tell our stories and give men an opportunity to say, I'm not alone. I love the phrase, tell your story, tell a bigger story, or tell a better story, and be part of a bigger story. And I think when we tell our stories, we get honest, we get real, and we give each other the opportunity to say, you too. I think we have a better story because most every man that I've met in a New Canaan Society chapter will tell me, this was my life, and then I met the brothers. And I think when we get involved in a place like this, in a chapter like this, our lives get better. Our stories get better because we have other guys walking alongside of us. And I heard it last night. And then I think there's a part of this that is like, be a part of the bigger story. And that is that God's plan is for our redemption. And the entire beginning of New Canaan Society started with failure. It started with need. It started with vacancy. And it didn't start as an idea to have a club. It started from a genuine need of a man who said, I am alone, and I think maybe others of us are too. And God's great plan is redemption, and to bring us into this bigger story where we have a role in bringing people to a moment of saying, you too, bringing them into a moment of saying, this can be better, and a moment they can say, this was not a mistake. I don't love my story. I don't love how I got here. But I'm so thankful that God has brought me here. And I'm so thankful that He's given me the opportunities that I have in front of me. I think He's uniquely crafted my story for this moment. So it was wonderful to be with you. Thanks for being here this morning.